very warm. Here it goes. Thank you. Got it. We welcome very warmly tonight Debbie and Preeti. Debbie is a diabetes specialist dietitian and also a lead specialist clinician locally at the Epsom and St. Helier University NHS Hospital, and I think more specifically at the John Kilner unit. But I'm sure, Debbie, you'll introduce yourself in more detail and give us more context. And we also say hello to you, Preeti. You have been a previous guest as well. Preeti Chauhan Whittingham, a local diabetes specialist, and you'll be there as well to support and provide sort of answers to, I'm sure, some of the questions that we will have later on. But I'll hand over to you now, Debbie, for what no doubt will be a very interesting talk. You will, I think, demystify some of the myths that exist and concepts and sort of perceptions around diets for those with diabetes. So we look very much forward to that, and obviously the Q&A afterwards as well. Over to you, Debbie.
Thank you very much. Can I just check you can hear me? Okay, everyone can hear me.
Very
okay.
Well.
Fabulous. Thank you. Well, thank you for having us both. Firstly, it's lovely to meet you all. Thank you also for the questionnaires. So beforehand, I sent out some questionnaires to try and identify what topics you'd like covered today. So they were always useful, just to get a bit more understanding of what you would feel useful for tonight's talk. So I've tried to include as much of those topics as I can. Half an hour, I'm going to be honest, is going to be quite challenging because it's a big talk and we could talk for ages. So some of my slides have got quite a lot of detail, but my thought process would be that I would email those and they could be shared, and what I do is try and summarize the bigger slides rather than going through them all, and they can be used for sort of future reference as well. Yeah, please feel free that you can ask questions along the way. I'm very keen for that, rather than feel you have to ask them at the end. So please feel you can in the nice way interrupt and ask questions as we go. And that's really important. So brilliant, thank you. Right, I'm going to go and share my screen. And apologies, we tend to use let's try this way. So,
do we need to grant Debbie the permission to present, Lauren?
I think it should already be granted.
Should be already granted. Great.
I can see it on the screen. Can everyone else, though? Apologies, we tend to use Teams, not.
Yeah,
so
I'm in the same boat as you are, Debbie. I'm a Teams person, so Zoom always throws me a little bit. But no,
let's try this.
Oh, I think something is coming.
Coming up.
Yeah.
From the beginning.
Yeah.
And we'll
Got
see.
it. Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, can see that.
Let's just check they move. Is that okay? Well,
yeah.
Fabulous. Thank you very much. So, okay. So this, I always start with this picture firstly, if I'm truthfully honest, when I give a talk. It's a little bit older now, but it's a great guideline that's actually very, in the nicest way, friendly for us, and I would say friendly for patients. So it was written by Diabetes UK before the pandemic in 2018. My presentation today will mainly focus on type 2 diabetes because the questionnaires I got from yourselves were regarding type 2 diabetes dietary advice. However, this paper talks about all our diagnoses, whether it's type 1, type 2, diabetes in pregnancy. And what I like about it is that it is very clear, very easy to understand. So if you ever want something sort of evidence-based that you know is definitely right, I have on a regular basis encouraged people to have a look at this paper and pick out the bits that are relevant to you, because you know it's going to be reliable. So it's a good source of information. So often I say, if there's something you want to know, Diabetes UK we know is a great resource, and this is one of them that is brilliant, that's out there if you want something very specific. So healthy, we'll start with healthy eating for diabetes. So it's quite a complex issue. I'm going to try and summarise some general information to start off with, but at the moment there's no single ideal approach to the amount of protein, fat and carbohydrates. So there are what we call macronutrients, our main food sources, and there's no single approach in a diabetes meal plan as such that's been established. What it tends to be is what people feel they can adhere to and what they feel is realistic, and often it's individual basis of what people's current eating patterns are, their preferences, and what the goals are that's right for them. That often, as dietitians, for example, someone came to clinic to see me, would help determine what advice I would give. However, what we are trying to talk about more and more is something called carb awareness to start off with. So if someone wanted starting advice, we talk about carb awareness. So we often think about the labels. You know, the government will talk to us about these traffic lights. The traffic lights do give us some information, and they do talk about, you know, what healthy eating in terms of salt levels and sugar levels. But actually in diabetes, what we are trying to encourage is the idea of something called carb awareness. Okay, so hopefully you'll be aware that carbohydrates are the main things that affect our glucose levels. So it's good to understand almost turning the back of the packet, okay, instead, and having a look at the bigger label that's on the back. Has everyone seen these before on packaging? They're quite happy where they would be. Okay, and the reason we say this is because actually what needs to be understood is all carbohydrates turn into glucose. Okay, it's not just about the sugar content. As you'll see from the label here, it talks about total carbohydrate. So that will include your sugar, but it will also include what we call starchy carbohydrate. All of this will be explained in a bit, please don't worry. And will therefore, that total carbohydrate give the both starchy and sugar content of foods. Okay, so the overall pattern. Sometimes people do find that confusing and think perhaps the sugar needs to be added to the total carbohydrate, but no, that's the overall one. Some people find, again, depending on the person, these can be quite confusing, and depending on the person, some people, if for example they were going to follow a low carbohydrate diet, perhaps for weight, you know, type 2 diabetes and for weight loss, they might use these to carbohydrate count. That's one approach that people may use. But others may, if they're on insulin, for example, if they're on insulin where what we call basal bolus, so long-acting insulin, and then insulin with meals, they may use this carbohydrate to do some carb counting, and that it can be for type 1 and type 2. If you're on fixed doses, and apologies if you're not, you know, you may not be on insulin, so this may not be so relevant. If you're on fixed doses of insulin, then sometimes what people do is have a look at, gain awareness and have a look and try and keep the carbohydrates similar. But if none of that applies to you, if you're not on insulin, it's still useful to understand the figures and have an understanding of how much carbohydrate you're having in your diet, and rather than just the sugar content that you're including. There's lots of different ways of doing that as well, not just labels. So there's some visual assessments. So this is from a book called Carbs and Cows that sometimes people have a look at, and it discusses, as you can see from the green circle, the amount of carbohydrates in food when you compare one to the other. Okay, so for example, as you can see, the slice of bread, it doesn't actually matter whether it's a high fiber one, so your granary, or the white bread, the carbohydrates are actually the same. But it's 15 grams. It will vary on the individual item and company, compared to the bagel, which is 50 grams. So it will give you an awareness. And again, this will make a little bit more sense when we talk about different dietary approaches for weight loss. Okay, so.
What was that item on? Did that happen to be an omelette there?
This one, pita bread. Is that
right? Sorry, in the middle there. Oh, I see. Right, it's all bread. Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Apologies. To be fair, they are quite white on a white background, so they're not probably the easiest thing to see. So,
okay.
Sorry.
No, I should have looked a bit closer.
No. It's a good question. Thank you. Okay, so what are carbohydrate-rich foods? Is everyone aware of carbohydrates and what foods include carbohydrate already? Okay, so we'll talk about which foods are carbohydrate-rich foods. So we've got I always say starchy carbohydrates. I tend to break it down to three topics. So starchy carbohydrates, so our pasta, rice, potatoes, cereals, the things we tend to base our meals on. Okay, what we want to do is try and encourage high fiber versions of these. There's lots of advantages, and it's not just with regards to diabetes. You know, fiber is good for bowel health, cholesterol. So overall, it's good to include the higher fiber. So sort of multigrain bread, you know, high fiber cereals, and then, you know, things like pasta. Actually, for diabetes control, it's not about whether it's high fiber. It's actually about cooking methods. We will talk a little bit, however, about glycemic index, which is what I'm talking about as we move along the presentation. And potatoes, we'd say new potatoes would be obviously higher in fiber versus something like mash, where you've already broken it down. So that's our starchy carbohydrates. Then we've got our natural sugars, I tend to call them. So our fruit, which is really important. You know, we need fruit again for vitamins and again for fiber content. I tend to encourage people, please try and have whole pieces of fruit rather than fruit juice, because we will get more benefit from the whole fruit. Again, from the fiber, and also no matter how much fruit juice you have, it only counts as one of your 5 a day. So try and encourage fruit. Again, there's no real guidelines about fruit, but we tend to say with diabetes, 2 to 3 portions a day. And that will depend which way, depending on what your vegetable intake is and how you manage with, you know, vegetable intake on a daily basis. The other one is natural sugars. Is milk and yogurt. There are other forms of carbohydrate. Cheese sometimes confuses people a little bit. Cheese isn't a carbohydrate, it's a fat and a protein. And the reason is, I always pick cheddar cheese. When you make cheese, you squeeze the lactose out, squeeze the liquid out. That's where the lactose is. That's where your carbohydrates is. So cheese isn't a carbohydrate. Then we've got on hidden sugars or added sugars. Now in this case it says visible sugar, so sugar itself and honey. There is no difference to the two. Sometimes people pick honey thinking it's better. In terms of diabetes and sugar basis, no, there's no difference. And then added sugar, it's really important to think about our added sugars. So we want low fiber, you know, we want the lower fiber cereals will have less benefit to them. And what I think sometimes gets really confused and a bit muddled with carbohydrates is they've had a bit of stick in the media. And sometimes what gets lost is the important message of picking the carbohydrates that have nutritional value and trying to reduce those carbohydrates, like the added sugars, that have less benefit to us. I have in the past had people that have cut out their potatoes and their pasta and their rice and their cereals, but are still including sweets and biscuits. So if you're considering, for example, reducing your carbohydrate amount, please consider what carbohydrates you're really focusing on. And the first step perhaps is to think about the added sugars and try and eat those less often and in small amounts. Okay. So I like this article, and there's a few more along the way, not just this one, but a dietitian, and this is on the BBC website. I have put the link on a slide, but there was an article in the BBC by a dietitian, and one of the things that she talked about was stay away from carbs, they're fattening. And basically this is what she summarized. So it couldn't be further from the truth. Gram per gram, carbs have less than half the amount of calories in the fat. Actually, excluding carbs from a person's diet can lead to weight loss, but actually it's probably likely to calorie restriction, and it can be partly due to weight loss. And actually rapid weight loss is not necessarily, especially without support, I tend to say, if we think about, again, we're going to talk about approaches, cannot necessarily be one realistic and sustainable, but often people regain the weight. Carbs are really important, as we've just discussed already, for vitamins, for minerals, and for fiber. And instead of cutting them out, opt for your whole grain varieties. What you'll probably find is the fiber actually increases satiety. People tend to reduce their portions. So I quite like that article, and as I say, there's a few more along the way, not about carbohydrates, but from the dietitian about different myths. And if you want a starting point, this is a really good approach. So this is called healthy portion plate, that we often say if someone walks into clinic and they're like, I don't know where to start with making healthy changes with their diet, we would often say, think about perhaps your evening meal and start with half a plate of vegetables, a quarter plate of carbohydrates, and a quarter plate of protein. Now, this doesn't mean you stack your plate up as well. It is also about portion size. So we tend to use visual assessment and say use your fists, because everyone is slightly different. So it's your fist, not someone else's, and it would be a fist over your starchy carbohydrates. So for example, in this picture, potatoes, and 2 fists of your veggies, and then a palm of your protein, or hand, depending on how lean it is. So fish, for example, would be a hand, or lentils. Have we got any questions so far? No. So these are 2 other bits. So I always say it's a bit of it's basically a triangle when we talk about influences of carbohydrates and glucose levels, so sugar levels. Okay, so we've got our talking about regular meals, we're talking about portion sizes. So again, this is a lovely diagram. So it talks about the effect of carbohydrate portion sizes on your blood glucose levels. Okay, so what it's showing is obviously the bigger the portion we perhaps have, the more obviously this carbohydrate breaks down into sugar, the more that then enters our blood system, and the more our body has to try and deal with in one go, and therefore the more effect it's going to have on our blood glucose levels. So we want people to eat regular meals, we want them to have carbohydrates, but also just consider the balance of your plate, going back to the last slide, and the fact that perhaps if you had the rice and you reduce the portion, maybe to the middle one, perhaps if you were having the bottom one, then there would be, you would potentially reduce your effect on your blood glucose levels. Carbohydrate, again, this second part of the slide is called glycemic index. Has anyone heard of glycemic index before?
Yes.
Yeah?
Yes, it's very good.
Sounds familiar. Fabulous, thank you.
You have to learn which fruit and veg does what, so it's a lot of detail to know about.
It is, yeah, I completely agree. And I've got on the next one of the next slides, I've got a quick quiz I thought we'd do about this, because I think glycemic index actually is quite confusing. So I'll move on to that. So this is high and low can sometimes be a bit confusing about which benefit. Obviously, this graph shows it quite well. But obviously, higher GI tend to have a bigger impact than lower GI. What I would say is, out of the 2 sides, which is why I put them together, portion sizes will have a bigger effect in terms of effect on benefit of blood glucose level versus glycemic index, but they're both actually really, really beneficial. So yeah, I'd always say consider portion sizes as primarily, glycemic index is an added benefit. So bear in mind, I've just shown you this chart. Have a look at these foods that I've put on here and think about which ones are low GI and which ones are high GI. And I'm going to give you a bit of a clue and say one of them is probably, it gets very confused and is a bit of an anomaly. So spend just a minute or 2 having a look, and perhaps if it's okay, we have a little bit of a discussion about what people think about in terms of each food.
So you haven't explained how the GI works. It's about the absorption of the food into the bloodstream, isn't it?
Thank you very much. No, that's very good. Maybe I should explain. Thank you. So basically, it's how quickly carbohydrates turn into sugars. So we've talked about this first picture. Okay, so there's a small portion. So we're saying that carbohydrate is it turning into glucose. Okay, because it's got to break down. So carbohydrate is a more complex little molecule, and it gets broken down by our body into small little molecules. With glycemic index, yep, perfect, thank you. Basically, with low GI, it takes longer. So your body has, I always say, has to do more work to break down the food, okay? With higher GI, they tend to be simpler foods, so your body has to do less work to break down those foods. So because it has to do less work, it tends to have, as it shows from the graph, more impact on your blood glucose levels, because your body doesn't have to do so much work to break down those foods. Does that make sense to everyone?
Yeah, I think so. So what is the actual mechanism that produces the GI?
Generally, in terms of it's a fibre. So because fibre, your body can't break down fibre. Okay, it's not an item our body can break down. It will slow down your body being able to try and break down the carbohydrates into simpler molecules. Okay, so I always say, for example, and I'll give you one of them, mash, for example, we cook potatoes, we've peeled them, we've done all the work for our body because we use a masher to break it down. So when you eat it, your body now has, and your digestive system, and it has to do very little process to break that down to glucose. Okay.
Right, okay.
Where, for example, new potatoes, you've got quite a lot of skin to inside, and therefore you have to do quite your body has to do a bit more work because that's got that skin coating the potato, and it therefore tries to break down that fibre, and it will struggle. Basically, it will find that more hard work. But also, you've got quite a lot of skin to the amount of potato. Jacket potatoes is the medium one because there's quite a lot of inside to the amount of skin versus new potatoes. So it will be an intermediate one where it will try and break down the fibre. It will try and break down the jacket potato, the potato inside, and it will take some time, but not as much as the new potatoes, where we've got quite a lot of skin to the volume of potato inside. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so yeah.
Fabulous, thank you. Okay, so these are the ones that I've identified. Have a look at them based on what we've just discussed and think about which you feel are likely to be lower GI and which ones are likely to be higher GI. I'll just give you a minute or two.
GI is glucose index, is it?
Yes, thank you very much. GI is glucose index. So if we went back to this previous slide, yeah, GI is glucose index, glycemic index.
Glycemic index.
Glycemic index, yes. Does anyone need any more time?
I'm nearly finished. I'm putting them into 2 columns.
Very good idea. And I'll put the answers into 2 columns, but I think we'll discuss it first before I show you the answers.
Yeah, yeah.
See what everyone, and please think about which you think is the anomaly. I'm going to call it the anomaly, and it will make sense. And I will explain why, if anyone feels they may want to have a guess.
I really want to hear that the fruit are low GI because I always try to convince myself that eating fruit is good, but I know that some of that can be deceiving. So I'm sure we'll hear about it.
And I think this topic, why I tend to focus it a bit more, is it is quite confusing. Some of the bits we've discussed visually, it is quite easy to understand and explain, and actually this one is where people find a little bit more confusing and a little bit less obvious. So right, are we happy? Are we happy to have a bit of a discussion?
Yeah, nearly.
Okay, no worries.
Right.
Can we put into 3 groups? One very fast, one very slow, one medium.
You can indeed. I tend to say do it. What I tend to do is do lower GI and higher GI. But yes, you can do it as low and medium and high if you want to, by all means. And then we'll try and rearrange them. So fruit juice. What do we think about fruit juice? High GI or low GI?
High.
Hi.
High. Everyone happy with high?
Mhm.
Okay. Pasta.
Low.
Low.
Low. Fab.
Low,
Okay.
yeah.
Low. Everyone happy with low. Mashed potato.
High.
High.
Low, high. Okay. Got a mix. That's always good. Okay. Chocolate.
High.
Low for chocolate.
Yeah,
Low.
I would say low.
So we've got some lows and some highs. I like
Okay,
Yeah.
depends.
Okay, baguette. I haven't said whether it's wholemeal or white. So, but generally they're white baguettes, aren't they?
I put low there.
High.
I would
High.
have put
It's white.
High, yeah.
For medium.
Medium. Okay, thank you. New potatoes.
Low.
That's low. Low.
Fab. Grapes.
High.
High.
Medium.
Medium. Okay, medium and high. Broccoli.
Very slow.
Low.
Low.
No.
Yes. Low. We're
Low.
happy with low. Everyone's happy with low. Okay.
Yeah.
Sweet potatoes.
Low.
Depends on how it's cooked.
Let's do
Depends-
low.
Okay, depends how it's cooked. Okay, thank you. Mango. All
High.
and low. High.
Hi.
High. Okay. Thank you. Multigrain bread.
Low.
Everyone happy with low?
Low.
Okay. White rice.
High.
Hi.
All right. Okay. Kidney beans.
Low.
Low.
No. Okay. Cornflakes.
High.
Hi.
Porridge.
Low. Low.
Okay. And Lucozade.
Hi.
Okay. Right. We'll discuss them. Go through each of them. So these are the answers. And I promise I will explain them. So fruit juice, everyone said fruit juice is high. So I tend to say things like hypo treatment. Okay, so you think about orange juice. If hypo treatment applies to you, so if you're on something like glycoside or insulin, you may have your clinician, I'm sure, will have talked about something called hypo treatment. Okay, so juice is high GI because a bit like the mashed potato, there was no fiber really left. It's all been broken down. So your body does not have to do much to it to break it down into sugars. So it is a high GI. Okay, so we tend to say to people, really, in an ideal world, be careful with juice, because, and what I mean by careful with juice is Diabetes UK say a small glass is fine, but actually there is benefit from having pieces of fruit because of the fibre versus juice. So I tend to encourage people to get their fruit from a portion of fruit rather than fruit juice if they can. Obviously,
Can you tell me about tomato juice?
tomato juice is a good question. It's a bit of a debate, isn't it? Because some people will say it's a fruit. From tomato itself, if we talk about tomatoes, they are classed as a lower GI food group, and they are in the Eat Well guide, which is the plate the government use. They are in the vegetable section. So it's a bit the same as soup. I suppose it's broken down slightly, so it more than likely will be a little bit quicker, and there isn't again much fibre. I suspect, and I'll be very honest, I don't know, that it's probably slower than something like orange juice, but I again would still always recommend, you have a tomato rather than drinking tomato juice. It's a good question. But yeah, so that's my thought. It's because tomatoes are going to be slower than a piece of fruit, actually. Anyway, they're going to be much slower. Mashed potato. Obviously, we talked about mashed potato. So you've mashed it for already. So there isn't much work your body's got to do to churn that mashed potato to break it down. So it's going to be higher GI. Bread. Again, yeah, anything white, any white bread, any lower fibre bread is going to be higher GI, because again, there's no no fiber, no seeds, nothing to break down. So it's going to be a higher GI. Mango is a slightly higher glycemic index. Yes, it is renowned for being probably the higher GI, higher glycemic index fruit. Actually, also a portion size of mango tends to be is actually one of the most carbohydrate rich fruits versus other fruit when you look at something like carbs and cows. White rice. White rice is I would say a higher GI rather than high GI. What I tend to encourage people actually is rice is a bit of an anomaly, because something like basmati rice is still a really good lower GI carbohydrate. Okay, even though we don't think of it as really, it's not fiber. With rice, what also is really important is how you cook it. So if you keep cooking it and it's overcooked, it will get quicker. But basmati rice, I tend to encourage people as a lower GI option versus white rice. Cornflakes, again, excellent. Yeah, they've got no fiber to them, so they're going to be higher GI versus something like porridge, as we've got here there, which is a lower GI option. And Lucozade, again, is something that people may use previously for hypo treatment, so it's going to be quick. Slow release foods, pasta.
Just on the point of Lucozade,
yeah,
because I put it as a low GI. The reason why, because since you've got the sugar tax, Lucozade has reduced the amount of sugar in Lucozade. Instead of taking the usual 100 ml, you have to take about the whole bottle now to compensate. For that reason, I say it's not a high GI, it should be in the low GI. That's my thought of feeling.
You're completely right about the sugar tax and the fact that for hypo treatment, we don't use it so much because the sugar content has gone down, but it's still got sugar to it. It's got no fiber to it. It's still a liquid form. So anything liquid form with sugar in it will be a higher GI item. It's anything lower GI tends to be something more solid with fiber to it. Other than anomaly, which is chocolate. Okay. And can anyone think why chocolate is a lower GI? I'll go back to pasta in a minute, I promise.
Can I ask you about Diet Coke?
Yes, of course you can.
Is a Diet Coke low or high GI?
The Diet Coke doesn't have sugar in it. It has sweeteners in it, which we say in things like Diet Coke don't affect your glucose level. But I have got a bit on sweeteners because there is some new information about sweeteners for general health. But no, it won't affect your glucose level. So it's not almost none avoid because it's not a carbohydrate.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So going back to chocolate, can anyone think why chocolate is low GI?
No idea.
No idea. No idea. Okay.
Cocoa is a bean.
It is. Yeah. Anything that chocolate's got other than carbohydrate.
The fat content.
Brilliant. Yeah, the fat content. So the other thing that affects this slightly is anything with fat in it. So chocolate is obviously not just milk and sugar. It's got fat to it. So fat, we know, slows down how quickly carbohydrates break down to sugar. So it is an anomaly because the fat that's within chocolate, it is actually a lower GI. Doesn't mean the nutritional value is any better now, but yes, considered a lower GI, which is why it's an anomaly. Thank you very much. So pasta, pasta again is actually not whether it's brown pasta or white pasta. Again, it's slightly a different one because again, it's how you cook it. So if it's slightly more al dente versus thoroughly cooked, it will be slower al dente and the more you cook it, the quicker it gets. New potatoes, obviously we talked about. Grapes, actually no, grapes again, they've got skin. So and so they're actually a lower GI. It's again about portion sizes of fruit. So a handful of grapes is fine. Sometimes what people find difficult grapes is they're quite easy to eat. But no, they are considered lower GI. And actually fruit itself as a portion of fruit, other than a slightly higher one of mango, are all lower GI. So things like your vegetables, your portions of fruit with skin on them, but your bananas as well, because they've got fiber in them. They're all lower GI things. So fruit is good. Fruit is good for us. Sweet potatoes. Again, they're quite fibrous. So they are lower GI because if you think about sweet potatoes, they're a fibrous item. So they are lower GI carbohydrate. Multigrain.
With the sweet potatoes, they also don't have the starch, or do they?
They still have carbohydrate in them. Yeah, they're still a starchy carbohydrate.
As bad as potatoes, the other potatoes?
Yes, and the same with other potatoes. They're starchy carbohydrate. Yeah,
Okay.
question. Thank you. But sweet potatoes, I think people sometimes find confusing because they say sweet at the beginning. But yeah, no, they're lower GI. Multigrain bread, obviously, it's got seeds. Kidney beans is a pulse. So very slowly, we almost don't count kidney beans as carbohydrate. Too slowly absorbed, very flat. They're also a protein, so they're a mixture one, but very, very slow, has very little effect whatsoever. And porridge, obviously, your body needs quite a lot of work if we talk about proper porridge oats, a lot of work to break those down. Excellent, you did great. Thank you very much.
Can I just come back to the mango, please?
Of course you can.
Yeah, when the mango is ripe, then it is sweet, but
Yep.
some people like to eat it in between.
Yes, and
So-
actually that's a very good question, actually. Bananas, there's a bit more to it. I don't want to confuse anyone, but some fruit, for example, and I suppose there is also something called resistant starch, which is another thing in itself. And the same with cooking pasta and cooling it down, and same with potatoes. So it's a little bit of it's a good question, but it's a little bit of a challenging area to explain probably in the time.
Yeah, because the one.
But you're right. The ripeness can have an effect, if that makes sense, on fruit slightly.
Yeah, because I like it in between, which is it is not ripe. No, it is green. So it's in between. So that's what I'm asking the question. So.
Yeah. So we do know as fruit. For example, I find bananas slightly easier, I suppose, visually to say. If you've got a green banana, actually it's quite slow versus when it ripens, it gets quicker. But that's not to do with glycemic index. That's to do with something called resistant starch, which is a different topic entirely. Which I don't feel we'll probably cover today, because I think it's a very good point though. But yeah, with some fruit it varies, but bananas is a little bit easier to visualize. Okay, so a bit more about weight. So the information about weight loss was another question that was asked. So weight loss remains the cornerstone of type 2 diabetes management. Doesn't mean that's the case and appropriate necessarily for everyone. And I tend to say if you have type 2 diabetes and perhaps weight loss isn't relevant, it's particularly an important area perhaps to ask your GP to refer you to a dietitian so you get the right advice. A lot of the group education will focus on weight loss, for example, which is why sometimes if weight loss is not applicable one-to-one particularly, may be useful. However, basically the guidance says that it doesn't matter how you achieve weight loss as long as it's evidence-based, one, and two, whether it's a low-carb diet, low-fat, Mediterranean, or bariatric, or if applicable, bariatric surgery, but obviously people have to be under specialist service. It's what you can adhere to, basically. What works for one doesn't work for another. Okay, obviously bariatric surgery is something that needs to be assessed by a specialist service. There's very clear guidelines, and that again is a sort of perhaps a more complex topic that obviously we won't talk about specifically today. And then for type 2 diabetes, we know remission, the aim from some of the more recent studies is 15% weight loss as soon as possible in relation to after diagnosis, tends to have more beneficial outcomes. However, we know regardless of diagnosis, even 5% weight loss has been found overall to improve glycemic index and your heart, vascular disease, your heart disease risk. But with all areas, it is about an individualized approach, taking into account different tastes, lifestyles and beliefs. And again, going back to Diabetes UK, if something like weight loss plan and dietary plan and food and different meal plans is useful, you feel, they have structured menus and meal ideas on there that again are really, really useful. Okay, I quite like this topic because it basically says here, no matter what way you aim for what works for you. Some of these are more evidence-based than others, I'll be honest. All of them do the same thing. They work by creating a calorie deficit. So there's not necessarily one approach that's better than others. So some of the evidence-based ones we're going to go through. Low-carb diets. I'm sure many of you have heard about low-carb diets. So that's defined as diets containing between 50 and 130 grams of carbohydrates. And again, that goes back to you looking at your back of your packets and your labels about what that means. 50 grams to give you, you know, a basis, for example, would probably be, for example, a apple and 2 slices of bread per day. So not much. Very often what, you know, people should start off with is maybe having a look at what they're including already and starting at the upper level. Please don't, you know, go down to the lower level. It's about realistic expectations. There's often people may start, you know, aiming towards 130, and it can be effective in managing weight, improve glycemic index, reducing medication requirements and cardiovascular risk. But I would always encourage people to try and get some support and guidance with these diets, especially if you're on medications that perhaps can lead to hypos. So it's really important that you seek support in being able to feel you can achieve these. Also important to think about nutritional balance. There is some more research that's needed about heart health and bowel health and long-term adherence. We've got lots of evidence about 12 months, but not so much about after that. Oh, this has gone a bit fuzzy, apologies. Mediterranean diet, again, has been shown to, you know, improve heart, risk factors, you know, things like mixed nuts, but healthy fats, basically. Think of healthy fats, mixed nuts, olive oil. Again, it's about energy restriction to achieve improvements in goals. But there's been some really positive research recently about Mediterranean diet in terms of heart health, even more so than there was. With things like vegetarian, vegan diets, so again, have become more and more popular, more and more trendy, but they didn't consistently show about any improvement in glycemic stability in type 2. Again, it was about energy restriction. Low fat had moderate success, so a bit of a mixed bag with low fat eating patterns. Again, it's about energy, you know, intake reduction, and the same as you can see with very low fat has some mixed effects on our cholesterol levels and our bloods, you know, levels that we have tested. And there's another one called the DASH diet, which again had some benefits, obviously, to stabilize blood pressure and heart risk. But I would encourage people, if you want to consider you know, something like this, again, seeking some, as I say, seeking support, doing some research on places like Diabetes UK, where you know you're going to get evidence-based input and information. Okay, so the next bit is about diabetes remission. That was one of the questions that was asked. So diabetes remission means that you achieve an HbA1c. Everyone happy with what HbA1c is? You've heard that from your annual reviews. You have a blood test perhaps every year to see how you're doing with your overall diabetes control, and not including any medication. Okay, we're at sort of 5-year basis. Again, this is something that really does need support when people are going to consider it. Research suggests that the most likely to achieve near a diagnosis. Please remember, remission doesn't mean it's a cure. Okay, diabetes can come back, and diabetes is still a lifelong condition. Again, if this is something you wanted to talk about, I would really encourage people to seek support and guidance. And people like your GP surgery obviously could direct you to the appropriate services. Losing around 15% weight loss in 3 to 5 months was basically what they found led to significant chances of remission. I won't go through this too much, but the main study was called the DIRECT study. Again, if you want to know a bit more about it, there's an update that's on Diabetes UK, but basically it was a low-calorie meal replacement, about 150 calories a day of 4 soups and shakes, support with trained healthcare professionals, and then afterwards about gradually reintroducing healthy food and maintaining weight loss, and regular support from clinicians. I will leave you to have a look at this slide. As I say, I'm happy to share them, but it was basically showing you what the results were from the overall research team of the direct study. Okay, I'm going to try and finish off on some myths. So these goes back to our dietitian on the BBC website, but yeah, it's a really good little article. I'd encourage you to have a look. The title is at the bottom, which again, as I say, I'll send the slides. But the next one is sugar in fruit is bad for you. Okay, so what she said and using evidence obviously based research is in recent years fruit has become unnecessarily villainized because of the sugar it contains, but actually it's naturally occurring. It's been high intake, yes, of fructose has been linked to cholesterol levels and high blood pressure, but there's two important points. Okay, it's important to think about free sugar. Okay, so things like juice, syrup and honey, and also the food and drink to sweeten, sweeten food. Okay, that's free sugar, so sometimes that's getting confused. Also, fruit has been associated, and vegetables have been associated with reducing the risk of heart, high blood pressure and some cancers. It's really good vitamins and minerals. It's got antioxidants, okay, that help our heart and help our cholesterol and that fiber. So we would always encourage with type 2 diabetes to have your 5 portions of fruit and veg a day. Okay, fruit juice, as it says, does contribute, but no matter how much you drink, it won't make a difference. It's one portion. So try and encourage different types of fruit. And the same with smoothies. We try and say to people, we don't encourage smoothies either. And if you do have smoothies, small portion, 150 mils at most. But I try and encourage fruit coming from actual portions of fruit, please. Say ideally, with type 2 diabetes, we tend to say 2 to 3 portions of fruit, but 2 perhaps if you're happy, getting your 3 portions from your vegetables. Avoid dairy, it's not needed. So I think this has gone wrong. I will send you, but basically we do need dairy. I think that we've ended up with 2 vegetarian slides and vegan slides. We do need dairy. It's really important. I think again there's been a lot of media emphasis about not including dairy, and a lot of the information out there, if I'm truthfully honest, isn't correct. Dairy is really important for our bones and our bone health and keeping them strong. Again, ideally we encourage 2 to 3 portions, and there's been actually some beneficial effects of dairy to blood pressure. The next one was vegan and vegetarian products are healthier. Again, a lot of the foods are often ultra processed, and actually are high on fat and salt and sugar. It's a personal choice, though. I always say vegetarian and vegan diets can be nutritious. It's about research. There's some really good websites out there. Vegetarian Society, Vegan Society has got lots of useful guidance if you want to consider a vegetarian and vegan diet. It's just about doing research and making sure, for example, following a vegan diet, you're taking the appropriate multivitamins. Yeah, and also, again, as we would, whether a vegan diet or vegetarian diet, it's just about cooking methods and avoiding, items such as frying. Supplements is often, again, a question I get asked an awful lot. And often I say to people say, do we need supplements? The honest answer is, for majority of people, no. The only one that we tend to find that we talk about more and more now is vitamin D. So in the winter, the general guidance is to have a vitamin D supplement, because we don't get vitamin D in the winter. And we used to say we got sufficient in the summer, but what general consensus is we get less and less time outside, and so they do recommend a lower dose of vitamin D. But the rest of them, so a lot of these vitamins that are in these products are often water soluble. Okay, so things like vitamin C, vitamin B, if we have a healthy balanced diet, we don't need them. In the nicest way, I tend to say we end up with expensive urine, because actually we just excrete them. So there are some, obviously, people that may need vitamins. So pregnancy, for example, is one, and obviously if you're being advised because your levels are low by the GP, that is different. But generalistically, if we're eating a healthy diet, we don't need multivitamins for general health. We can get them from our diet.
What about B12?
B12, again, it depends if your GP has advised your levels are low. So if people have been advised that they need have low levels, generally you may be asked by your GP, you know, to have an injection for B vitamins. But as a generalistic rule, if not, your GP hasn't identified any reason that your, you know, vitamin B levels are low, they are water soluble, so you would just get rid of them. So that depends on the individual, basically, supplements on an individual basis. And if you're being advised your levels are low for things like vitamin B. But otherwise, if you're not, if you know your GP hasn't said your vitamin levels are low, then no. There's just a few, you know, few potential groups, such as pregnancy, for example, that can be lower.
How about vegetarians?
Yeah, so vegetarians is another example. On the Vegan Society as well, there is some guidance about what vitamins to take. So yes, this because the protein, for example, is less, and the guidance says that realistically the most you'll probably achieve, for example, is 25%. There is some guidance about needing to take some multivitamins, but the Vegan Society provides a list of what ones you should take. So I do say for vegans and vegetarians, have a look at their websites, Vegetarian Society, Vegan Society, and follow their guidance. But yes, it's good. Thank you. I missed that one out, which goes back, as I say, to the one we were just saying earlier. But yeah, but otherwise, if you're getting balanced diet, no, you shouldn't need them. Again, vitamin D, please have a look at the information. It's on the NHS website. So just have a look at that information about vitamin D, because that has changed a little bit over the years about guidance for general population and vitamin D supplements. Last little bit is about sweeteners, which was one of the other topics. So we've been saying for years, you know, change your sugar to sweeteners. That's the way forward. Cut out your sugar, you know, but you can have sweeteners in your tea and coffee. Actually, there's been some more guidance recently, especially this year, from the World Health Organization, and there's a bit on Diabetes UK. And basically, it's now encouraging us not to generally use non-sugar sweeteners. So these sugar, you know, sweeteners in our tea for weight control. I'm going to go past this for a second, trying to explain it a bit. Basically, the guidance is, if I'm honest, it's still a bit woolly and it's still a little bit vague. But they are suggesting that there is some possible long-term effects of sweeteners in terms of increasing risk of, you know, obesity, cardiovascular disease. The studies are quite small at the moment, and that's what I've been saying to people. But I suppose what we're finding now is just trying to say to people, you know, have less fizzy drinks, have more water, which is probably really what we've been saying for years, because potentially we will find, looking at the information World Health Organization has given us, that there may be longer term effects. I think part of the difficulty also with this is, one, as I say, the studies are small and it's probably early days. But more and more as dietitians, we are trying to discourage saying to people like that we used to change from sugar to sweeteners, and basically telling people to try and not have anything in tea at all if possible, for example, and try and think about those fizzy drinks that you've been including, and try and increase your water intake instead. Okay, so from today, it's been quite a lot and I apologise. Please consider what you've learnt. If you feel applicable, consider there 2 or 3 changes that you feel from today you could make if appropriate. We always say, to be realistic, it's not about making loads of changes in one go, because no one can keep to that. It's about small changes that you feel are realistic. Again, it goes back to realistic and can adhere to. And that's my talk.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much, Debbie.
No problem.
I'm really pleased that we're recording this, because there is just so much to, even if we attended today, I think there's so much to go back to and actually re-listen and take up. So that's very, very good. Thank you so much.
No problem. And I apologize, it was a bit long.
No, not at all.
There's an awful lot. You could talk for hours, is the honest answer. So
Not at all.
apologies, it was a bit of a whistle stop tour of it. But yeah, so thank you.
Thank you. Helen, was that a virtual hand? Oh, there was a clapping hand. Yes, absolutely. I think we all agree. Thank you so much. There were some really good questions and talking points during your presentation. Is there anything else that we have for Debbie and Pretty?
Okay,
Interesting.
well, I could go on for ages as well. So basically, we've got these two columns, high GI and low GI.
Yeah.
And the items on the high GI, I basically avoid them. And I'm sure they're not banned altogether, but when you're making choices about what you eat, you sort of say, no, I won't have that mango, I'll have an apple. So every day we do make choices about what we'll eat, what risks we're taking with our health. And it's quite hard. It's like a minefield, isn't it, for people with diabetes? But also information is key. Knowing which is which, like we've learned something tonight, haven't we? About, oh yes, chocolate's okay. But again, not in huge numbers, there's a balance. And that's why the Diabetes UK magazine is called Balance. It's obvious that's what we need to be doing. So, yeah, my question is, after saying that, people who need access to a dietitian, how do we do that?
Good question. So generalistically, from my understanding, Pretty may be able to say a little bit more, but generalistically it's GP. So a lot of the services, our service at the hospital is a little bit different, but it would be community referral, and GP is the way to access it. They sometimes may refer people to group education initially, but yeah, if you want a dietitian, it's asking your GP to do the referral, or practice nurse.
And how long does that take in your experience? What's the time frame, do you think?
It's a very good question. It will vary from one, if I'm honest, it will vary from one trust to another. It wouldn't be our team, and therefore, apologies, I can't answer how long their waiting list is. Every department will have a different waiting list. So, and what services they offer. I think more and more during the pandemic, people have started offering groups. I don't know. I can't answer. I'm really sorry, because I can't tell you what their waiting list. I know what ours is, but our criteria is slightly different. It will be the community team. I can find out.
It's helped me. I'm not saying I need referral, but it's helped me a lot. And the articles in Balance, the magazine, it carries on my interest in cooking and food. It's not like, oh, everything's banned. It isn't. You should still enjoy cooking and eating, all right, but just healthily.
I completely agree.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's a great message. Thank you, Alex. I think it's a brilliant message, because it's really about, you're completely right, it's about balance. Food is there to be enjoyed. It's an important part of our quality of life. And it doesn't mean that we can't have, foods like a bit of chocolate. It's about, isn't it, less often small amounts, but enjoying those foods, and focusing on some of the healthier foods as our main items. So yeah, it is all about balance, because otherwise you won't carry on things. You won't adhere long term, will you, to a healthy eating concept if you don't get a balance overall. So thank you. Lovely, very nicely worded. So
I don't think there is, because they have got a community diabetes dietitian in Sutton, and I haven't heard that there's like a long in terms of turnover of patients. So I wouldn't have thought it'd be months and months, or more than 4 weeks or something like that for them to see patients. But like Debbie said, it would have to be type 2s are usually referred to the community dietitian, diabetes dietitian.
Just from personal experience on dietary advice in Sutton, my GP offered me a digital program, which was basically a kind of self-help thing, which I didn't really feel I wanted to pursue because it seemed likely that without getting any feedback or any sort of response, it wouldn't be successful. It's good to know that there is perhaps somebody I could speak to personally, and I'll follow it up with my GP. Could I ask a question then? I was just interested about the 130 grams to follow potentially. Is obviously one eats different quantities during the day, but is there anything to be said about snacks and those kind of things? Because you can get pretty hungry, can't you, between breakfast and midday, etc. But those 5 grams or whatever all add up, don't they?
They do. That's very true. There's 2 parts to it. I suppose the 130 grams is the suggestion what is considered a low carb diet. However, if someone's perhaps, I don't know, I'm going to go to the extreme, someone is in 300 grams a day, we wouldn't suddenly want them necessarily to go to 130 grams. It is about a gradual reduction, if that makes sense, to maybe healthy, healthy changes. And then perhaps someone would go to 130 grams, which is why I think support from a dietitian from the past, I've worked in a community service, but somewhere else. We've done it in steps, if that makes sense. If people are having perhaps a higher carb diet, we've reduced them down and then got to the 130. There's 2 aspects about 130. Depending on the person, some people will count vegetables in that, some people won't. And again, it's about realistic expectations. And there's not that much in vegetables. So it will depend on the individual, I've found from experience, of whether they want to count that or not. Snacks, I often encourage with type 2 diabetes, if you're aiming for low carb diet, if you're maybe struggling with glycemic control as well, not necessarily about the low carb diet, trying to think about, yes, what options of carb free snacks, but also perhaps trying to keep them to about 15 grams of carbohydrate or less at a time. So a portion of fruit, most portions of fruit are that, is the honest answer. And the reason we say 15 grams is quite a good equivalent. Again, depending on the individual, we might say 20 grams because it depends. We want people to have fruit. So if perhaps bananas is the thing that, every day they manage and they include, of course, that's fine. And that's not a bad thing. And bananas are really good for us. So 15 to 20 grams. And the reason we sort of say 15 grams is it tends to have smaller effect on your glucose level. Okay, so it doesn't have too much impact. So then you can concentrate on your meals and the effect it has on your glucose levels. So very often we say 15 to 20 grams for snacks is a good guidance. Obviously, we want to encourage nutritional value of those. And then, yes, sometimes people will use some carb-free snacks as well. But yes, you're right. And I think that's why the gradual process is quite important. If someone's on 300 grams, cutting down to 130, and trying to make sure nutritionally balanced is quite a lot to expect an individual to achieve all in one go, which is why something like the healthy portion plate is a really good starting point. And people could do that for lunch and evening. They don't have to just do that for the evening meal. And I found that's worked really well sometimes. And that's sufficient, actually, for some people. Is that okay?
Can I ask you a question about lifestyle? Recently, I returned from a cruise of about a month. The food that provided a lot of processed food. And in fact, when I come back, they did a blood test on me. My HbA1c has shot up. And I've been not taking any drugs at all for 10 years. Now I have to start on the drug. Now, can you elaborate on how processed food can affect us?
Yeah, of course.
How to avoid it.
Oh, bless you. I think it's hard, isn't it? Because it goes back, I probably shouldn't quite say this in this way, but it goes back to quality of life, doesn't it? We want to enjoy holidays and you've got Christmas coming up and it's a balance, isn't it, as well, is the honest answer. Yeah, so we've got to enjoy those, those parts of our life. We've got to enjoy going on holiday and enjoying, things like all-inclusive and enjoying Christmas. So it's going back to what was talked about balance. Processed foods can affect our diabetes in different ways, can't it? One, again, sometimes hidden sugars, you know, things like cocktails, I suppose, as well, depending on the individual. So sometimes it's the hidden sugars. Fat, fat obviously has an impact on, you know, on our heart. We know that triglycerides, which sometimes in the processed foods can have some impact as well on our diabetes control. But I think often, if I'm honest, in terms of cruises and holidays, perhaps it's the hidden sugars that we're not quite so mindful of, if that makes sense, when we go on holiday, versus the, you know, the food itself. And the snacks, probably going back to what David said, in the nicest way, when we're all inclusive, we probably snack more than we perhaps do at home, because our eating pattern changes, doesn't it, as well? Yeah. But hopefully, bless you, those that HbA1c will come back down. You're not on your cruise.
Can I just follow on from that? Because I went on a river cruise in October, and yes, the temptations are there. But what I noticed that the puddings, that the choice of the pudding was absolutely awful for most people. And I thought, I can't believe that I am the only diabetic on board. And there were people tucking into huge ice creams and sugary cakes and all of that. And I had to say, well, can I just have a fruit salad or a piece of fruit? Now, I should have owned up at the start of the holiday to say I'm diabetic, but I don't feel I should have to, because I'm just trying to eat a healthy diet. But next time I go on an all-inclusive or something, I will tell them that, and I think they will then cater for me individually. But I don't really want that. But I can't be faced with, you know, all this not very good food that I have to say no to. So, and I just think for everyone on a holiday, it's almost as if they let rip, they loosen their ties or their restrictions on what they would normally eat at home, and they go rip and say, yes, I'm going to have all of it. But it's hard to refuse, and that's the situation. Or if everyone else is having ice cream and you're the one that isn't, and there is that psychological problem, isn't there? So
it's not that, it's the availability. And I mean, when I go back to Singapore and Malaysia, most of the food that sells in the food court are carbohydrates. You have got fried noodles, fried thing with a little bit of vegetable, and you can't get what you want. Do you know what I mean? The availability of food might not be there. Well, at home, that's fine. I can eat whatever I choose to, because to some extent we are controlled by our environment. And I suppose that you don't find that. Yeah, you're able to detect that, to control your environment.
But there's all these people that are eating that food that isn't the best for them as well. It's not just you that should be staying healthy. Most other people should too. So yeah.
I managed to do that for the last 10 years when I made my diagnosis. Now I suppose because I'm getting older, I can't control it anymore. I don't know.
Can I just say, as vegetarians for the last 30 or 40 years, we've been struggling with those same sort of problems, or just in general life, you know, just trying to find restaurants and the sort of things that you really want are impossible. They cost a lot more. When you're cooking at home, it takes longer to prepare veggie meals, probably more expensive, more fuel, etc. these days. And it's a real problem. Diabetes and vegetarians just doesn't mix, really.
Double the trouble and the effort, isn't it?
Yeah. Anyway, thank you very much. I'm sorry if I interrupted you, Rose. I didn't mean to.
No. I just wondered whether the government are in tune with healthy eating, or is it something that's not that important?
I think it's slowly beginning to dawn on them, actually, that long term, if they try and get people to manage their situation a little bit better, then the outcome might be cheaper. That's all. But it's taking a long time for that to work its way through. And I suppose the outcome would be lower, shorter waiting lists and perhaps not so many complications for individuals, etc., etc. But I don't know. I don't know. But, that's probably not what we're talking about here, but it's a very good point.
Because it's a number of the type 2 diabetic on the increase as a whole and worldwide. Is it a worldwide phenomenon?
That's true. That's true. Yes. The better off we become, the more we perhaps, I don't know, complicated question. I'll leave it to somebody else to answer.
Who is the advisor to the health minister?
We
Martin.
can promote health. I'm sure Diabetes UK tries to do that, exert pressure. But then you've got the the retailers, the food industry in general would be fighting it too. So
yeah, very true.
William, did you have a question earlier? I think we spotted your hand. No. No problem. So look, we might be coming to a natural end actually, unless we have any final observations, questions. If not, Pretty and Debbie, I hope you don't mind if we sort of reach out if there are any late or follow-up questions.
Yes.
Once again, thank you so much for being our guest tonight. And as we said earlier, the last meeting of the year, the next one will be on the 25th of January, which will be our AGM and the talk as well. As always, when we close, if you enjoyed today and you're not a member yet, get in touch, fill out the membership form, and just be part of the group going forward with all the benefits that it brings. And this is not just attending the AGM. What I would also say is that, look, should we not see each other before Christmas, before the 31st of December? We as the committee would like to wish you all the very best and your loved ones as well for the festive period. Have a peaceful and restful Christmas season, and also a very good and strong start into the new year 2024. But I think for now, all of us, we wish you a lovely evening, good rest of the week, and a good weekend ahead.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank
Thanks
you
so
very
much.
much.
Thank you.
Thank you. It was a
Lovely meeting you all.
Yeah, thank you.
Likewise.
I know
Thank
I
you
didn't
very
much,
say much,
Debbie.
sorry. It was Debbie's area.
We'll have you again, Pretty.
Yeah,
Thanks so
that's
much.
fine.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks a million, Debbie.
Bye-bye. Thank you very much.
Bye. Lovely meeting you.